Hello, I'm Buchanan, and I'm presenting our paper, Who Am I and Who Are You and Who Are We? A Scientometric Analysis of Gender and Geography in HCI, with my two colleagues, McKay from RMIT University and Huiwen Zhang from the University of Melbourne. So we're talking about conferences in HCI, and those are very important markers of prestige for any researcher in the domain, but they're also venues where there can be barriers to participation. Now, just some of those, and there are others, include factors such as ethnicity or race, sexual identity, religion, or actual nationality. Of course, other factors could involve issues such as personal disabilities or a whole range of educational socioeconomic factors. Now, our research question, because we couldn't address all those factors, looked at two only, and I'll explain this a bit more in our methods section. One, the issue of gender. We've looked predominantly at male and female. I'll explain why later. And also of current location of the author, where they're based. So I'm based in Australia, even though I'm actually a citizen of the United Kingdom and Ireland, and Dana is a citizen of New Zealand and Canada, for instance. Now, in our research method, we wanted to actually work with a fair degree of variation and scale. We looked at which countries the different conferences were being held in, or more specifically, which regions of the world. Because if we want to understand the different conferences, we needed to see a conference that moved around from location to location. And as we'll see, that limited our choices. We also wanted to consider conference prestige and conference size. Some conferences are larger, others smaller, some are actually more prestigious, and others, often regional conferences, for instance, are often perceived as being a bit less so. All of these are things that we know could affect how much opportunity is for someone to participate in the venue. So we looked at three major conferences: CHI, UBComp, and DIS. And the reason we chose these is that within the study period that we looked at, they each appeared once, at least, in Europe, North America, and Asia. So they moved around significantly, and this gave us an opportunity to look for impacts on participation. We also looked at some regional conferences. Nordic, because one, it's a well-established and well-known conference, but also the Nordic countries of Europe are seen as particularly good for gender equity. Maybe we might see a lower impact there. We looked at AusCHI in Australia, an Asian conference, and one of the most dominant ones within the region for HCI, and certainly the longest standing at this point. Now, North America doesn't have so many regional conferences, but CSCW is consistently in North America, so we choose it as a proxy for that in that particular case. Now, in our research methods, we considered data we could get from public sources. First, we took every individual paper that we could at these conferences, taking information from the ACM. We looked at the homepage of each author. And using that and other information, such as their email address given on the paper, we could decide where they were living. We also could work out which gender identities they expressed using words like he, she, they on their homepage, and from that we could describe gender. Now, just to cut to the results, we find that the geography of authors is influenced by where the conference is located. Unsurprisingly, when a conference is in a region, there are more authors from that region. But UBComp had a noticeably lower level of representation of female researchers, about half that we'd see in CHI and DIS was marginally better than CHI. And also female participation in particular varied by conference series and conference location. So these factors of the conference, the location, and the author's gender all did interact. And female participation generally dropped when a conference was placed in a region other than the one the author was based in, more so than male. When it came to regional conferences, there were, however, some promising signs. One, in the case of Nordic, we could see very much similar levels of attendance by female authors as we saw at CHI. This also applied at OSCHI, but for CSCW, we actually saw a much higher rate of participation amongst women than we saw at other conferences in North America. Now, I mentioned earlier on that we are conscious of the issue that we're only looking at the gender binary, and of course there are many people identified beyond that. They only had a few cases that we had in our data. We do, for instance, identify one person who transitioned during the period of time that we were looking at from one gender to another, but also with such small numbers as we saw, there's a very strong risk of re-identifying individuals, which we obviously would wish to avoid. But we would caution that what we saw was a lower representation than is true of the general population, suggesting that our public presentations that we were seeing were not representative of the overall picture. We do know, for instance, that the academe is in general reasonably equivalent to the general population in this regard from earlier research. So we have some recommendations, one of which is providing virtual conference opportunities may reduce barriers. There may be a cause to financially rebalance conferences, perhaps making it cheaper for people to attend from actually remoter parts of the world. We also could suggest the idea of looking at quotas or counting to look at ensuring representation is more equitable, or of monitoring the situation more actively, and that being part of the overall reporting cycle for every conference. There's lots of future work to be done, including looking at other identities, disability, ethnicity, religion, or sexuality, for example. But also, I think qualitative work is really important here to try and understand realities and not just a big picture. And for groups like the non-binary populations is relatively small, this is probably a much more authentic and reasonable way of conducting meaningful research. But also, in terms of quantitative work, the issues of, say, co-authorship, which are known to be difficult across the sciences, could be looked at as well. Thank you for your attention. Here are our Twitter handles, and we're happy to take questions. Thank you.